All right, we're recording. Today we're going to have a little encounter with the great Roman poet Ovid. Ovid and Virgil being two of the great canonical Roman poets. And then uh, Ovid has a project, the Metamorphoses, a project of collecting various magical transformations from Greek myths and Roman myths and weaving them all together. And that's going to be the main thing that we're going to look at today. So let's just get to that. And I think you'll see that we can have some fun with this topic, as we should. Okay, so we are going to look today at Ovid and his Metamorphoses, his famous Metamorphoses. Okay. Um, Now, a couple things here, a couple historical things. We're just going to have a couple of these slides, and then we're going to get to some visuals pretty quickly. Um, Virgil and Horace, as I say there, uh, we will have, well, we won't get this semester. Anyway, um, now these folks, these celebrity poets of imperial Rome around the time of Christ or the first century before Christ are not obscure people like Homer and Hesiod were. They're not people who are perhaps mythical or where we really don't know anything about when they lived or died. In fact, we have for most of these people the exact day of the week and that they were born, that they died, as well as sort of where they went on vacation and who their cousins were and everything else about them. These were very well documented celebrities in a big imperial city. And so they were very well known, and and they're not sort of mythical characters at all. In the case of Ovid, you'll notice we are unclear on exactly when he passed away, sometime in either 17 or 18, the year 17 or 18 of the Common Era, the era after the time of Christ. So we'll talk about why that is. Just very briefly, again, he was an upper class Roman young man. When his 20-year-old brother died, Ovid had been planning on becoming a lawyer, apparently, but this precipitated a kind of crisis in him, and he traveled. He went on a sort of big tour around the known world, and when he got back to Rome, he decided to dedicate himself to poetry. A good idea because he turned out to be very good at it. And of course, poetry at this time is very much a public mode of entertainment. People want to read the latest poems by the leading poets. It's one of the main sort of forums that they have. And of course, the poem can be recited by someone, and these people have much better trained up powers of memory for that sort of thing than we do because of the technology. And Ovid becomes extremely popular. And what is Ovid? He's a worldly, sort of wicked, urbane city poet. He writes erotic passages. He's an urbane character, but he doesn't quite, that's not a great match with Octavian, who we also see in the story of Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra that we have another video about. Octavian, who at this point has become Emperor Augustus, he's called himself Emperor Augustus, the first real emperor, the second emperor after Julius Caesar. And Augustus is a very conservative sort, a very buttoned down sort. He has a farm outside of Rome. He is a populist leader who leads ordinary folks. And so he doesn't really care for Ovid very much. Ovid is one of these citified sort of liberal people. He doesn't go along with Octavian Augustus's attitudes. Something happens. It's one of the great mysteries of literature. It's possible that members of Augustus's family, who Ovid was involved with, had some sort of plot. There's some sort of rumor of that. And it may be that there was something in one of his poems, whether it was a published poem or a private poem, that was offensive to the emperor. Ovid said he was exiled for a poem and a mistake. But in any event, Augustus sent him off. He did the worst thing he could possibly do to Ovid, which was send him off to the Black Sea, off to the middle of nowhere, in a very small town with hardly anybody around, where Ovid spent the last over 10 years of his life, during which time he wrote some very sad poetry about being in exile, nothing like the poetry that he did in his prime. And he died out there and never did manage to get back to Rome. And so, as I say, nobody knows what exactly Ovid did so that Emperor Augustus finally, put the hammer down on him, but he did. So, all right, so that's the interesting biography of the poet Ovid. His masterpiece is the Metamorphoses, the Transformations. Again, it's a high concept work, a sort of meta literary work in the sense that what Ovid has done here is gone through the Greek myths primarily and the Roman myths. Again, many Roman myths are transliterations of Greek myths. And he's strung them all together. In fact, almost 250 metamorphoses. What are metamorphoses? Metamorphoses are beings, whether they're people or gods or trees, turning into each other, turning into rocks, people turning into animals. Um, Many of these, I mean, since he did such a big job of it, many of these we don't know from anywhere other than Ovid. So Ovid himself becomes a very important source for Roman and Greek mythology. Ovid also, though, is himself a brilliant poet who weaves these things together, adding in details, amplifying things. This is a syncretic literature. That's something we've been talking about all semester. And here we see the poet adding on and gathering together, aggregating. Uh, so that's one thing. And the other thing about that is that um, Ovid explores these boundaries. With Ovid, we think of boundaries and we think of the sense of the self. And with Ovid, that's always fluid and changing. Um, so I want to say about that because I think this is important and not something to be shied away from. But a few years ago, at Columbia University, there was a committee of students, a curriculum committee of some kind, and they decided they were going to ban Ovid's Metamorphoses from the classics, the introductory classics class at Columbia, because they thought it would trigger people. Because of course, in these stories, what you have are many, many instances of, for example, Zeus is forcing himself on people all the time. People are killing each other, tormenting each other, and so on. Now, I also am not in favor of killing and tormenting and raping and pillaging. No, believe it or not, I'm kind of against those things. But I'm also very much in favor of studying the classics. And one of the things that I've been talking about is the way that the Greek classics, we were talking about this a lot, we were looking at the drama, at Euripides, at Sophocles, at the way they explore sort of psychosexual depths and disturbing kinds of senses of alienation, physicality. And, yeah, this is really the sort of gritty heart of being alive and being in a body, and it all ends in death, and it's all very scary. Um, so if you're someone who's, I mean, I don't want to be glib and I don't want to be snarky. I'm torn, in fact, between two things. On the one hand, yeah, I do want to. I don't want people to be comfortable. I don't want people to go. Actually, it's true that I don't want people to be comfortable, or else I wouldn't teach the stuff that I do. In fact, I don't want people to be comfortable because I don't think, in the intellectual sense, being comfortable is a very good idea. But what I was trying to say before I said that was, I do appreciate the fact that part of our modern project at the university is creating a comfortable environment for people who aren't used to it, who aren't used to being there. I see some of this as a matter of culture shock, and I think it's a good thing because it means that people are coming into these precincts, these scholarly and intellectual precincts who haven't traditionally been there. And that's why we have these kinds of tensions about it. And I agree that it's important to build a comfortable space for people. And I see the problem with the culture shock. I know something about culture shock. But, you know, if you look, looking at the real world in college, we look at the real world. Then you go back to your bubble and live in your fantasy. But you're going to be exposed to actual reality for a couple of years. It's called college, real world. And yeah, it's a rough place and it's not for everybody. A lot of people can't hack it there, right? But that's what we're going to look at today. So again, I'm not trying to be mean, you know, but but there's a sort of reality check at some point. All right. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. That's already probably way too much to say about that. Okay. But that's what's good about it. That's what's good about it. Anyway, it's not that big. It's not that deep. I probably shouldn't have even made that whole speech. Here's the first English language translation from the 15th century. And this is interesting. Arthur Golding's translation of Ovid from the early 16th century was the one that was read by William Shakespeare and Herbert Spencer, the poet. So that makes Golding himself very influential, right? Because he provided the English translation of Ovid that then is used by these giants of English literature. So he starts stringing them together. Now, we've already seen that all of these civilizations that we've looked at since the very beginning of the class have myths of the flood. And we've also seen that the flood was certainly real. There's scientific evidence for the inundation. In the version we see in Ovid, you have Deucalion and Pyrrha are the only survivors, and they throw these rocks over their shoulders. And rock she throws over her shoulder turns into another woman. The rock he throws over his shoulder turns into another man. So that's another sort of origin myth, right? That's what happened after the Great Flood. All of these, by the way, what we're looking at, you'll recognize the Greek ceramics when we see them. Pretty much otherwise, we're mostly looking at Renaissance objects, mostly, and some oil paintings from some other centuries. Most of these marble statues, though, are probably from the 16th, 17th centuries. So Eros is the little Cupid baby with the arrow, and he's always causing problems. You see this in the cartoons on Saturday morning when he can shoot somebody with the arrow to make them fall in love with the first person that they see, and he can shoot someone else with an arrow and make them despise the first person they see, which is very much fun, right? And he does this with Apollo and Daphne, except that's bad news because Apollo is Apollo. He doesn't take sort of no for an answer. And I think it's either Hera or Athena who turns Daphne into a laurel tree finally out of mercy in order to get her away from Apollo. And so that's why we put the laurel wreath on the winner's head. Here's again a Greek ceramic. Zeus seduces Io, and then he turns her into a cow to deceive Hera. Hera, though, I have to say, is sort of the ultimate enabler, nightmare wife, and she always takes it out on these young ladies and goddess ladies and things. And so Hera ties Io to a tree, but the kicker in this one is that she's guarded by Argos. Argos, who has 100 eyes all over his body. There you see him on the vase. He's got eyes all over his body. And therein hangs the tale, I assure you. This is a version, of course, of the Icarus story, Phaethon. That's a name that also we find in light physics, if I'm not mistaken. And it's the same story. He flew too high, flew too close to the sun, and fell to his death. A morality tale, of course. An interesting detail here is that the falling sun scorched the Nubians when it fell down out of the sky. Very many of these, and particularly the Roman ones, because the Romans were more concerned with sort of engraving themselves onto the universe than the Greeks were, have to do with constellations, the nighttime sky. And of course, the The months too. July, named after Julius. August, named after Augustus. In this case, again, Callisto seduced by Zeus. It's all Zeus just running wild. But no, Hera thinks it's all Callisto's fault, turns her into a bear. She's about to be killed by her own son. Is that like creepy and Oedipin and stuff? Of course it is. But Zeus puts her up in the heavens. The bears, there's lots of bears up in the heavens for some reason, I've always noticed. Mercury, or Hermes, the Greek is Hermes, the Roman is Mercury, is the sort of fleet-footed messenger of the gods, but also an impish trickster sort of character. Early on, he's stealing Apollo's cattle. There's a whole big story about Hermes stealing Apollo's cattle. That's sort of how we meet Hermes usually in the myths. And Battus is unlucky enough to be there, and so he just turns him into stone. Yeah. Then he also, there he is in the middle. There you really see him with his staff of Asclepius that he's got in his hand. And so he wants Herse, but her sister Aglaus doesn't think that's a good idea. She's trying to put a stop to it. So he turns Aglaus into stone. It's kind of the way he has of dealing with things. I mean, in the movies, you can just turn people into stone. In real life, you turn somebody into stone, and then what happens? You know what I mean? All right. So, and this is a very nice little vase painting there. Zeus kidnapped Europa and turns her also into a bull and swims with her to Crete and makes her queen of Crete. And Europe is named for Europa. So that one didn't go too badly. Cadmus, who was Europa's brother, slayed a dragon. Now, the other thing's happening, remember Crete, and now you see slaying the dragon. A lot of these stories, that the ones that Ovid's interested in, have to do with this meeting of East and West. As they have to do with Jason and the Argonauts and the story of the fleece. Remember Medea from Euripides, and in general, this encounter with the mysterious Orient. So you'll notice that that's kind of a theme in a lot of the stories that we see in Ovid. So this is an origin story for the Spartans, the rivals of the Athenians. The story is that Athena said, plant the dragon's teeth to Cadmus after he slayed the dragon, and the Spartoi, the Spartan warriors, sprang up. There's a great claymation scene in one of those old Jason and the Argonauts movies where they plant the dragon's teeth and the Spartan soldiers come up, or skeletons, fighting skeletons, come up out of the ground. It's all very spooky. Actaeus is out in the country. He's a hunter. He sees Diana bathing with her posse, I guess, there. And she sees him and she turns him into a deer, and he's killed by his own dogs. Now people, I mean, I gotta say, this one, we had this coffee table illustrated book of Greek myths when I was a kid. And I used to really like to look at big pictures in it, and I used to hang out looking at it. But this one, it had this one in it. And, you know, I was like, I don't know, 7 years old or 8 years old or something. I didn't know anything. And I just thought that was so disturbing. I mean, oh my God. Like, just, he saw the lady naked, and then she turned him into a deer, and his own dogs ripped him to pieces. And I was, God, I think it probably like blew it, you know, a couple of times in high school because of the trauma that was inflicted on my self-conscious by that myth. Semelle's pregnant with Zeus's baby. Who else? Oh, and so who gets involved? One guess, Hera. And so what does she do this time? She tells Semele, look, you know what you really want to do, Semele? Because I'm not so bad. You know, I understand. He's kind of irresistible. But what you really want to do, tell him to make love to you the way he makes love to me. You know, that's really the ticket. You'll see. Trust me on that one. And so Semele goes to Zeus and she tells him this. She wants him to make love to her the way he makes love to her. And Zeus tries to talk her out of it. He's like, hey, shorty, man, you really don't, you don't want that. But no. Yeah. But the baby he saves and sews it into his leg. He can do that. Athena, of course, springs fully formed from his brow, but Dionysius springs fully formed from his leg. So So there's a nice old drawing. Now, Tiresias, and I do want to talk about Tiresias for a second. He's a great character here. Uh, there's Hera after. I gotta watch, Hera, I mean, she rhymes with rich, you know what I'm saying? Uh, he strikes two copulating snakes, and that she doesn't like that, so she turns him into a woman. And Tiresias is a woman for 7 years. Now, and it's interesting. There are various different versions of what Tiresias was doing during his 7 years as a woman. Among other things, one has him as being a famous courtesan who is one of the greatest lovers around the place. But in any event, something else happens and he comes back and becomes a man again. So Tiresias then is the only person who knows what it's like to be a woman and what it's like to be a man. He kind of she is kind of a specialist in unique perspective. Another story about Tiresias, he's one of the only mortals who's ever been able to go down to Hades and actually be there as a mortal and then come back. So he knows what it's like to be in Hades. No other living person does. An important fact about Tiresias is that he's blind, of course. He's the blind seer. He can't see with his eyes, but he can see. The last thing I would mention about Tiresias is he can do prophecy by interpreting bird songs. Listening to bird songs and reading prophecies off of bird songs was a major technique for Roman fortune telling. Here's a sad one, Narcissus and Echo. And by the way, we're looking at these just in the order in which Ovid kind of strings them together in the Metamorphoses. I think I've got the first like 30 or so on here. So Echo loves Narcissus, but Narcissus, of course, only loves himself. He's not interested in Echo. Echo hangs in there and just keeps fading away until only her voice is left. That's all that's left of Echo. You can just hear her voice in the air. Narcissus, so much in love with his own reflection, so much in love with his mirror gazing that he eventually also dies. His self-love, I guess, is such a narcotic that he just can't go on. Now this I like. Check out the bottom of this gnarly rad vase. Pentheus. So now, one thing about let me just step out for just a second here. So remember, the Greeks are a very sexually segregated society. They're sexually segregated like some modern, say, Muslim Arabic societies are, the more conservative ones. Very sexually segregated. People, men and women, do different things, spend their time in different places. And so that's part of why it has such a reputation. Classical Greek society is a sexist society, fair enough. Also, though, there are these big woman spaces in classical Greek because they had especially the upper class women, of course, they had their own cults and their own festivals and their own retreats that they used to do. And the Greeks, partially because of this segregation, are really interested in kind of battle of the sexes, the way that the sexes kind of antagonize each other. So, so that's part of where all this comes from. So then look at this screen, because what happens inevitably, there's the guy, right? And he knows that the women are having their meeting and they're talking about those women things, right? And he doesn't know what that is. So I know what I'll do. I'll hide. I'll hide in the ceiling. I'll hide behind the bushes, and I'll see what they do. You know what I mean? So then so he's doing that. He's up there spying on the women having their spiritual retreat. Where they're getting into and what are they doing? Well, what do you do on a spiritual retreat? You get into a Dionysian orgiastic frenzy. I mean, and so they do, and they are, and that's when they spot them. And that's, and then this is another one of these really like traumatic things if you're like 8, because then what happens? Check this out. See in the middle there? This is his TT and his mom, right? That's who they are. Yeah. And see him in the middle, and see how like his guts are hanging out because they ripped him in half. I mean, and then look on the left, and there's this other lady's got his leg. Yeah. I mean, you can't, because you can't beat that with a stick. Although Although, yes, I mean, I find myself a little bit triggered. I must say, I'm a bit triggered by that. How about hermaphrodite? I mean, I always figured hermaphrodite meant something in Latin, like the Herma and the Aphrodite, and it was like, it's. But no, I guess it's just Hermaphroditus is the name, and Salmacis doesn't want to let go of Hermaphroditus and holds on to him so long that they merge and become a half man, half woman, and that's where the hermaphrodite comes from. I don't know much about Phrixus and Helle. They're rescued by a flying golden ram again, and they're out in the ocean. So these are people involved with these Eastern adventure stories. This you gotta love. Look at the um, guy in the mouth of the giant snake. I mean, is that cool? So Phrixus gets all the way out to Colchis, where Aeetes takes him in, and he sacrifices the ram and gives him the golden fleece, which was then guarded by the dragon. So of course, then Jason or Theseus or Hercules or whoever is going to have the mission of going out and getting the golden fleece. Cadmus and Harmonia pray for relief from their troubles, so they're turned into snakes. I mean, one guess who turns them into snakes. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, we can check it out. Got your cell phone. People are kind of mean. If anybody brags about anything, sometimes somebody takes it bad. So Andromeda's mom was bragging about how pretty Andromeda was, so she got chained to a rock by Cetus, but Perseus comes and rescues her. Andromeda, of course, is up in the nighttime sky. The way we look at it, Orion is the bull is chasing Andromeda, and Orion is going to slay the bull and save Andromeda. Andromeda usually on your left hand if you're looking at Orion. So, but one problem there was Andromeda's uncle Phineas, who thought he was going to get to marry Andromeda. And so what does he do? I mean, talk about reception gone south. He shows up with Medusa's head. Perseus does. He has to get Medusa's head out, I guess, and turns Phineas and his men into stone. I mean, can you imagine how bummed out the bride must have been and the cleanup? Okay, Pierides, again, they challenge the muses to a storytelling contest. Not only do they do that, but typically these people who are foolish enough to do that then go on and say something that's obnoxious. In this case, they tell stories where the Titans are the heroes over the Olympians. Of course, there was the war where the Olympians eventually defeated their older generation, the Titans. So they offend and they get turned into magpies, chattering magpies. This, of course, one of the most primal of all, explaining the changes of the season. Persephone and Demeter. Persephone carried off to Hades. Her mother has to make a deal, and that's where we get the winter and the summer. The nymph Arethusa bathed in the stream of the river god Alpheus, and he falls in love with her, but then she cried so much that she turned into a stream herself. She was going to cry her a river. And that's what she did. She cried herself into a river. Triptolemus is nursed by Demeter and instantly becomes a man. Right. There was a baby. She nursed the baby, and the baby went bing into a man. That would be kind of unsettling. That's kind of neat and cute. And then he travels Greece in a winged chariot, spreading agriculture from the air. And again, this is we see this figure in the pre-Bronze Age collapse Mesopotamian myths as well. So the younger male deity who's traveling around in the sky, delivering agriculture to everyone. So that's interesting. Arachne, right? Like that's where this is why the order of spiders is called the arachnids. Arachne challenges Athena to a weaving contest. There's her loom there on the right. But again, not only does Arachne challenge Athena to a weaving contest. But she also weaves all of these stories about bad and wicked things that the gods had done, and deliberately insulting stories that she's weaving. So she really gets right up in Athena's face. I don't know what she's thinking. And so Athena turns Arachne into a spider. That's where spiders come from. Niobe has 14 children. Leto only has 2. Unfortunately for Niobe, Leto's 2 are Apollo and Artemis, who are extremely militant. Artemis, of course, the hunter. And they kill all our children and turn to stone. So I guess you're not triggered yet. Sorry, I didn't mean that. I'm sorry. Leto was wandering the earth after giving birth to Artemis and Apollo. She wanted to drink water from, is it Apollo? Yeah. She wanted to drink water from a pond. The peasants stirred the mud at the bottom. I don't know whether they just did it accidentally because they were like washing their clothes, or they didn't want Leto to get a drink. But in any event, turned them into frogs. Huh, what do you expect? Now this one, here's my question about this picture. This is, again, a medieval era, Renaissance era marble carving of Apollo flaying, that is, taking the skin off of Marsyas the satyr, who has lost their musical contest. Okay, and they've got a little putti, a little cherub there. Okay, fine, but so some guy decided he was going to take a block of marble and cut a picture, cut a statue of Apollo cutting the skin off Marsyas the satyr. I mean, like, when did he get the idea? What was the pitch to like the producers, that pay for the marble? King Onemus, fearful of prophecy, be killed by his son-in-law. Everybody always running away from prophecy, always trying to defy the will of the gods. And the trick is to live within prophecy. No, not King Onomaus. He killed 18 of Hippodamia's, his daughter's boyfriends. Killed 18 boyfriends after defeating them in a chariot race. He'd always challenge them to a chariot race, and that was the end of that. Until Poseidon got sick of it, and he said to Pelops, "Here, kid, here's the keys to my chariot," and then that was the end of it. Now, this is a rough one, though. He forced himself on his sister, on his wife's sister. I'm sorry, lied about it to his wife. His wife found out about it. She killed their son and served him to their father, like in that South Park episode. Remember? And then he tries to kill the sisters, but then the Olympian gods just go, for heaven's sakes, people, and they turn him into a hoopoe and her into a nightingale, and poor Philomela becomes the swallow. Story of how the birds became the birds. That's Jeremy. And here, see, she's got his head in her hands. She's going, "Here, what do you think your omelet now?" Here's Boreas, the north wind, carrying off Orythia. The winds are, Boreas does a lot. There's a lot of myths about the wind. See all the stuff in the picture sort of flying around? Because he's creating a big wind. I guess he creates a big wind with his wings too. Here's Jason and Medea. Now, and this is that's a 20th century painting. I think that's Aubrey Beardsley, actually. But notice Medea there she's making a potion. She's pouring something out of a little vial into a goblet, because she is an Easterner and she is an herbalist and a witch. And she knows these Eastern arts. And so then, of course, you remember her from the play by Euripides and what happens with them after that. Here we got that cool, gnarly dragon again, eating the guy. Jason gets eaten, but Medea can make him disgorge Jason, make him throw up somehow, because she's got these potions, right? And so again, Theseus, Hercules, with the labors, the 12 labors of Hercules. One of the, for Ovid, the symbolism of that is very much the Greeks and the Westerners confronting the Orient. Theseus and the Crommyonian sow, you can see her udders there, she's the big sow. And the Marathonian bull. And this I like. Look at that sculpture. That's a great sculpture because the Minotaur had the body of a man and the head of a bull. And he was the one in the middle of the labyrinth. And every year, 7 Athenian youths and 7 Athenian virgins had to be fed to the Minotaur. So Theseus had to go take care of that as well. The Cretans. Uh, and so here he is taking care of business. I like that style of that painter. And here he is in the middle inset of a labyrinth in a Roman mosaic. Now, this is kind of fun. King Aeacus needed to populate his country, so he went to Zeus. Zeus said, your people will number as the ants in the oak. And so you get the Myrmidons, like ant people. But then this became a big legend, the Myrmidons, because the Myrmidons were ferocious warriors, ant-like warriors. And later there really was a unit, a brigade or so, called the Myrmidons. And they were ferocious and feared fighters, like the Gurkhas for the Indian army kind of thing. You send in the Myrmidons. And here is the, I don't know if you can see that. Here is the super cool Myrmidon helmet in Bugs Bunny, the alien who's got the B-52 space modulator, is wearing a Myrmidon helmet. Here's Eos. Cephalus is a hunter, so he's always out in the middle of nowhere, so he's always getting in trouble. He's always out in the middle of nowhere. That's a good way to run into gods. There's nobody else around. Also, he's kind of irresistible to the ladies. So here you see Eos, the goddess of dawn, kind of carrying him off, and he's like, yo, what can I do? You know, I just act naturally. This guy's a liar. And Laelaps is his dog, chasing the fox. And that's what we get, the big dog and little dog, Sirius the dog star. And we find that in Ovid. Okay. And as I say, I think I should know, I think over about 30 or 35 just then, these. And Ovid has upwards of 250 of these in the Metamorphoses. This is what the Metamorphoses is. As I say, it's kind of a meta high concept piece of literature. It's really quite extraordinary that way, because it is a syncretic weaving together of all of these transformations. And he is also, noticed, very much keyed into exploring the meaning and the possibilities of this notion of transformation. Last thing I would say as a philosopher is about that. You know, you want to think about how much transformation can there be, and you're still you, right? I mean, can you be an elephant? Can you be a bird? Can you be a coffee pot? It's just, I'm just asking. Okay, so anyway, that's Ovid. As you see, he is all full of all kinds of good stuff to look at. And so there's a couple different things to look at. You can get into the high life of cosmopolitan Rome if you want, or you can just go find some cool myth that you like here and explore that. There's lots and lots of choices here in terms of what you want to do with that this weekend. Okay, all right, talk to you soon. Bye-bye.